everybody? Robert W. Farnsworth here. This week, our playoff clinching Minnesota Vikings head to the left coast, Seattle, to face Geno Smith, Michael McDonald, and the Doobie Brothers, and the dastardly Seattle Seahawks. Will they come home still chasing the red-hot Detroit Lions, or will they be sleepless in Seattle? We'll find out.
Thanks, Bobby.
Oh, that just gets dumber and dumber every week.
You kidding me? Dave Wannstedt, Dick Geron, whoever the coach may be.
Papa Bear Hallis. So the Vikings head out to Seattle, a place where historically they have not played well. As Bob Dylan once famously said, the times, they are changing. Seattle's 8-6. They are currently, if the playoffs were to start today, they would not be in the playoffs. They are 8-6, and they are currently 8th in the NFC. The Vikings are 12-2. As we said earlier, they clinched the playoff spot last week, and they are still very much in the mix for the NFC North title and home field advantage in the NFC. As if they win out, they win both the NFC North and home field advantage, it looks like. We are going to do our big board. We're going to start with quarterback. We're going to finish off with my dad's favorite subject, intangibles, because he had to explain it to me once. How did he explain intangibles to me? Do you remember?
Yeah, he said, they're things you can't see, son.
Yeah.
And then you ran running through the house. You knocked over the TV tray, spinning around, trying to do your spin doctor. I'm Chuck Foreman. Yeah. You knocked over the TV tray, and that was it because, son,
I'll never be Chuck Foreman.
You're never going to be Chuck Foreman.
You're never going to be Chuck Foreman.
Don Glover's the greatest ever, dude.
Oh, he was awesome. That Brett Favre jersey was my dad's Brett Favre jersey. That's why.
Oh, is it?
Yeah.
Oh, nice.
I got mine hanging up in the closet upstairs in my closet, but that's my dad's Brett Favre jersey. That's why.
Nice.
That is
in honor of my father. All right. So quarterback, Drew. Why don't you start us off with: is Geno Smith playing? Or is it going to be Sam Howell versus Sam Darnold?
He's going to play, and I'm going to tell you why he's going to play. First off, why would I want to go see a movie about Bob Dylan?
Minnesota native Bob Dylan.
Still, I don't want to see a movie about Bob Dylan. Remember when we did the Colts preview, which seemed like a year ago, and we talked about Anthony Richardson and Joe Flacco, and I said they have to start Flacco because they have no chance with Richardson. They have a low chance with Flacco, may only be a 4% chance, but you got to start the guy who gives you a better chance. You better off starting Thurston Howell than Sam Howell. That guy is trash. He's garbage. He sucks as a quarterback, and he sucks as an athlete on a sports team. But I don't mean any of that in a bad way. Just a competitive way.
Wow.
They have to start Geno Smith if they want any hope. I don't know what their playoff. I know it's slim. They got a slim shot at the playoffs, but Geno Smith is starting because he's the only guy that gives them a shot at winning this game. He is. You can't put Howell in there. You have no chance. Kind of reminds me of that Colts thing. That said, Seahawks are 5th in passing yards in the NFL. I was kind of shocked to see that, but if you also factor in that they're 6th overall in attempts, that kind of explains how they had so many yards. They have to throw a lot of passes. Only 14 touchdown passes for Geno Smith. That's like 30th in the league. It's terrible. 14? I mean, come on. He won't be 100%, so he's not going to be scrambling around. So Brian Flores can take that, check that box off. I don't have to worry about the Caleb Williams effect and chasing him around. That'll help the defense on that part, but he's not going to run. He's not going to run, and he's got a bum knee, so he's not going to run even more. Check mark to Darnold and the Vikings on the quarterback, and it wasn't even close. And my last note will be Seattle gave up 7 sacks and 12 quarterback hits to that team from Wisconsin, and that's the team from Wisconsin. They got a whole different animal rolling in there this week. Sam Darnold, checkmark Vikings on the quarterback.
Yeah, same here. One thing, Geno Smith's been sacked like 45 times this year. Plus, he has a bad knee. I think he's going to give it a shot. Mike McDonald said they're going to evaluate him throughout the week. As of this recording, he's on track to play. Is he going to be able to finish? I don't know. If Sam Howell does play, I watched a good part of that Sunday night game last week against the Packers, and he looked absolutely atrocious. Yeah, I'd rather have Sam Malone, the old character from Cheers, in a quarterback. His first series, he was in, he went 3 and out, and he was sacked 3 straight times. Darnold gets a check mark all the way. And you mentioned Geno Smith only has, I think, 14 touchdowns, you said? He has 13 interceptions, and the Vikings lead the league, I believe, with 20 interceptions as a team. So, Chris, what do you got?
This is a relatively easy one for Darnold. I mean, I know he wasn't super great last game. I don't know if the hand injury is still bugging him a little bit. He wasn't quite as accurate as he usually is, but he's so far above and beyond what Geno Smith has provided this year for Seattle, which is weird given all the people that Geno Smith has to throw the football to. I mean, they don't lack for receiver talent up there. He's just not been on Sam Darnold's level this year. So, yeah, that's a pretty easy check mark for Sammy Darts.
For the running game, Kenneth Walker is their main guy, and he was out last week. He didn't play Zach Charbonnet. He's kind of a mid dude, and Walker was out last week. I think as of right now, neither Walker or Charbonnet have practiced. If neither of those dudes practice, you're looking at like the husk of Sean Alexander being asked to come out of retirement. Maybe Marshawn Lynch, if they can pay him enough Skittles. I don't know. I mean, they literally have nobody. I mean, at least if the Vikings could not play Aaron Jones or Cam Akers, I would be mildly confident in Ty Chandler being able to have the Vikings having some semblance of a running game. The Seahawks, they have virtually nothing without Walker. You take Charbonnet out of the mix, they're going to have to throw the ball 50 times. Vikings, I mean, Aaron Jones, Cam Akers, all the way. Vikings.
Yeah, the Seahawks running game is not good. I mean, I believe they're about 27th or 28th in the league as far as yardage, yet they somehow have 17 rushing touchdowns on the season because I think Charbonnet has 8 and Kenneth Walker has 7 and Geno Smith has a couple himself. But I don't know if it's an offensive line issue. I don't know if it's because Kenneth Walker is a pretty solid running back. So I don't know if they've got something going on the offensive line up there. But the Vikings have been so good against the run for the most part this year. I know they've had their issues over the last few weeks. This is probably a good chance for them to get themselves right again because the Seahawks run game is not good. And Aaron Jones kind of got things going last week. They had a couple of drives where he did the majority of the work. His fumbling issue has gone away seemingly, so hopefully that will not come back. But yeah, this is another easy check mark for the Vikings, I think, as long as the defense continues to perform against the run.
Drew,
I'll give you the check mark, and I'll give you a couple tasty tidbits thrown in there. I know a lot about Charbonnet because he played for Michigan 2 years before he went to UCLA, so I watched him very closely at Michigan. He's kind of like Tyler Algier for the Falcons, except he's faster, a little shiftier, and probably a better receiver out of the backfield, but he's a very physical runner. And I think the Vikings match up better against Walker. I'd rather face Walker than Charbonnet, but I'd rather have the finesse running back than the power guy. The Charbonnet can wear you down. I think it's better if they give the ball to Walker for the Vikings. I think Charbonnet is going to end up being their feature back. I think he's going to be a better back in 3 years. He'll be the starter there anyway. The Seattle Seahawks, the last 9 games, they've only surpassed the 100-yard rushing mark 3 times, Ted. They are 28th, like Chris said, in rushing yards. Vikings have been struggling with run defense as of the last month. They're still number 2 in the league. And let me throw this out there. Speaking of Aaron Jones, in the Seattle's last 11 games, the opposing team has rushed for 116 plus, which means more, in 8 of them.
Do I need to write 116 plus means more? Let me write this down.
116 or more. Some of them were 120, some were 130. There was one up there at 156. But out of the last 11 games, 11 teams, 8 of them have been over 116 at least.
Wow.
Against Seattle. So expect the Vikings pound it and pound it hard.
That's what she said.
That's right. Check mark, Vikings for the run game.
All right. Chris, why don't you talk to us about the receiving game for both teams?
And like I mentioned earlier, the Seahawks have some pretty solid pass-catching talent. Jackson Smith and Jigba is coming around his second season. He's just shy of 1,000 yards. DK Metcalf has been doing this for a while. He's going to go over 1,000 yards again this year. Noah Fant has been a solid tight end for them for a while since they got him in the Russell Wilson trade. But, the Vikings receivers have just been rolling these last couple weeks. I mean, we know about Justin Jefferson. Obviously, he's the best wide receiver in football. Jordan Addison is that dude looks more and more like Anthony Carter every time I watch him. He's the smallest guy on the field, but he's got more talent than everybody else. Hawkinson is getting to be on a roll again. They're even working Josh Oliver and the running backs into the passing game. So as far as the receivers, I think this is, I hate to keep saying easy check marks for the Vikings, but it's another easy one as long as Jefferson and Addison and Hawkinson can keep on the trajectory they've been since Hawkinson came back and they've all been together.
Drew?
You got Metcalf and Njigba, 2 very good receivers. Lockett is the husk of whatever. He's old. I mean, his longest catch of the year, I think, is 30 yards. So he's not what he used to be. He used to be a long, like, bombs away type of guy, but he's older now. So the area, I'm going to give the Vikings a check mark, but the area the Vikings got to watch are the running backs out of the backfield. Seattle loves to throw to their running backs. They're basically top two running backs. You know their names already. They have 77 catches for 553 yards, compared to the Vikings only have 52 catches out of the backfield. But what team in the NFL doesn't have more catches out of the backfield? I'll tell you, if the Vikings had a screen game, nobody would beat them. That's another story for a different day. So they do like to throw the ball out of the backfield. I'll give them that. But I think the Vikings have better splash receivers, which means big plays. I think Seattle feels more like a possession receiving team from tight end to wide receiver. Vikings have the better quarterback, the better pass blocking offensive line. They got a better tight end. Easy check mark for me for the receivers.
Yeah, I'm going to go with the Vikings as well. I was going to say Seattle's receiving core is more well balanced. I mean, when you look at the yardage totals, Metcalf, Smith and Jigba, and Lockett are a lot closer in yardage compared to Jefferson, who's got over 1,200 yards. And then the next guy, Addison, has, just under 800. TJ Hawkinson missed the first, 7 or 8 games, whatever it was. But like you said, he's really made his presence known the last 2 or 3 games. He's coming on strong. All that said, I think the Vikings have a clear advantage here. What every team playing the Vikings tries to do is take Justin Jefferson out of the mix, and you can't. I mean, Justin Jefferson is going to get, he may not get 150 yards, but he's going to get catches. And if you do focus on eliminating him, if you will, Jordan Addison's going to get open, or Jalen Naylor's going to get open, or now TJ Hawkinson, it looks like he's fully up to speed and he's going to get open. And Sam Darnold is going to find those guys and he's going to kill you. Vikings get this check mark. Drew, talk to us about the offensive line between Seattle and Minnesota.
Will O'Neal play? Is he going to play? I don't know if you guys have heard about that.
It looks like he is, yeah.
I think so.
I think he said after the game on Sunday that he was okay, and he looks like he's on track to play. So,
will Brandel and Robinson get their head out of their ass? Can you answer me that question? Where's the focus there of those two guys? Focus. Put your game face on. Be a gamer. I don't, like Bobby Knight says, what is game face? What is it? Whatever it takes, put your game face back on. I think even with O'Neal banged up, we have a better offensive line than Seattle does. Seattle, the other problem with the offensive line, you want to try to build your offensive line to the identity of how you run your offense. Makes sense, right?
Yeah.
Vikings are balanced. They could do it either way. They're going to attack you either way because that's how you create a good offense, is by keeping teams not knowing what you're going to do. Seattle wants to run the football. They don't have a physical run blocking offensive line, which in turn means they don't have a good pass blocking line. So if they can't run it, they're forcing themselves into a corner, Chris. The offensive line, I think they're not building it right. I mean, it's going to take a couple years there, but I think the Vikings get the check mark here just because they are even down a guy, or maybe both tackles. I still think they have a better offensive line because they know the identity of the team. They know their role more. Seattle's guessing. We don't know what we're going to do. You got to factor in the front sevens on this, guys. Seattle's going to be in a world of shit this week with the front seven. That has to factor in when you're looking at this game. Who's going to have the better production from their offensive line come Sunday? Front sevens matter. And I'm giving my check mark to the Vikings on the offensive line this week.
Yeah, I am too. Cam Robinson, I think, might have had his worst game as a Viking with the dumb penalties.
Get your head in the game. Come on.
Blake Brandel, he peaked early, and it just seems like he's been on a slow decline. If O'Neal plays, I think the right side will be okay. Reisner's been okay. I don't think he's been a dramatic improvement over Ed Ingram. Vikings need to work on the interior offensive line in the offseason. But I would argue, other than maybe Leonard Williams on the Seattle front seven, which we'll talk about in a minute, this is probably the most favorable matchup they'll get on an opposing front seven that they've had so far this year, and they'll see this year. And when you look at Seahawks offensive line, I like Laken Tomlinson. I think he's a pretty good player, but they can't run the ball. They can't protect Geno Smith. I like the Vikings.
They lost their center last week.
Their starting center didn't practice on Wednesday when we recorded this, and he's got a knee issue. He went out around the same time as Geno Smith did last week, so that's something to keep an eye on. The Seahawks offensive line isn't great. Ted mentioned Tomlinson. Charles Cross is a decent enough tackle, but the rest of the line doesn't really scream they're that impressive or anything like that. like Drew said, even if O'Neal doesn't play, even though I think he's going to, Questenberry has proven himself to be a solid backup at the tackle spots. The Vikings, as long as Cam Robinson isn't committing however many dumb penalties, I think they'll be fine up front against this defensive front seven. So I'll give it to them here.
So front seven, Seahawks run a base 3-4. Leonard Williams is a pretty good player. He's probably the best player on the front seven. Jonathan Hankins is their nose tackle. He's had a terrible year. You compare Seattle's front seven player for player, and as much as I like Leonard Williams, other than maybe Jonathan Bullard, I'd swap him out for Jonathan Bullard, but there's not one other player on the Vikings front seven that I would replace with Seattle. I mean, you look at the Vikings front seven, and Dallas Turner even last week, he stacked a once-in-a-generational quarterback on his knees. He was on his knees and sacked a once-in-a-generational quarterback. I mean, this is how good the Vikings defense is getting. And Ivan Pace Jr. out, Camus Grugier-Hill, and Jamin Davis, who Drew, you were really speaking highly of when the Vikings signed him. He's playing more and more with the first team. I mean, they have Grugier-Hill as the first team guy with Pace out, but it looks like Davis is playing more than Grugier-Hill, but that's just kind of what I see. It just seems like he's making more plays that I'm noticing than Grugier-Hill. I'm going with the Vikings on this one.
They all fit a certain mold that Mensa wants, and he fit right in there with Jihad and all the rest of those guys.
Yeah. Drew, who do you got?
Mine's pretty easy. You got a finesse offensive line and a finesse offense. This is a bad matchup for the Seahawks, Chris and Ted. This is like, you know who Joel Osteen is?
Mm-hmm.
Sadly, yes.
This is like putting Joel Osteen in the frickin' mosh pit at a Korn concert. You can't have a finesse offensive line going up against the Vikings front seven. This is the best matchup they've had all year for an offensive, because the offensive line, they're slip block, they're finesse, Ted. And finesse doesn't work against these guys, against the Vikings. It doesn't. You need to be physical with them. They're not a physical offensive line. Vikings front seven all day with the check mark.
Chris, why don't you wrap up the front seven and then lead us off with the secondary?
Yeah, the front seven for the Vikings is still as good as any front seven in the league, even without Ivan Pace. Like we just said, Dallas Turner is finally starting to get it, but the guys in front of him in the lineup have been so good that he can't get on the field. We've talked about Jonathan Grenard. We've talked about Andrew Van Ginkel. Josh Metellus is getting a lot of play at that inside linebacker spot next to Blake Cashman. That dude's probably due for another extension here before too much longer. We talk about Harrison Phillips every week. If this isn't the best front seven in football, someone's going to have to tell me precisely who is, because I can't think of a front seven in the league that's better than Minnesota right now. It should be a long afternoon for the Seattle offensive line having to go against these guys, so I will give the Vikings a check mark here. Getting into the secondary here, it looks like Stephon Gilmore is going to be back after missing a couple of games here, which is awesome to see. But the secondary's been holding it down. I mean, even putting guys out there like Fabian Moreau. I think Dwight McLaughlin got some snaps at the end of the game last week. We talk about the safeties with Bynum and Smith compared to the Seahawks secondary. I mean, Tariq Woolen is a solid enough player. Kobe Bryant has started to make a name for himself here a little bit recently. And I haven't even mentioned Byron Murphy Jr. yet, who is playing himself into a pretty sizable contract going forward here too, because he's a free agent coming forward this year. But between those guys in the secondary, I know they're going to have their hands full with the Seattle's receiver group, but I think they can handle it. So I'm going to give the Vikings a check here.
Drewster.
Vikings get my check mark. I'm not saying Seattle's a scrub secondary, but when you factor in the front seven we just talked about and the pressure, if Seattle doesn't have their starting center calling out the blocking schemes, let me put it to you this way. There's going to be 3 picks this week for the Vikings. Shaq Griffin's going to get one, Harrison Smith's going to get one, and Gilly's going to get one coming back.
Okay.
3 picks for the Vikings. Secondary is going to prove that they get my check mark this week. That's all I have to say about that.
They're all going to come from the secondary. I think it's going to be a tip pass, and linebacker, maybe a D lineman gets one. When you consider how much Seattle turns the ball over, they're minus 5 in turnover margin. Vikings secondary's ball hawking secondary. I like their matchups. I'm taking the Vikings secondary on this as well. Their top corner, I think, is Trey Brown, probably. He's banged up. Drew, you've been talking about this all season, about the Vikings just kind of letting teams hang around. And last week, they got it together in the second half from Chicago. This is a game I really think they can pull away from Seattle early and bury this team. I mean, just looking at this, I don't know. We'll see. Anyways, red zone. Drew, tell me about the red zone.
Look at what the Vikings have been doing in the fourth quarter lately. The last 3 games, they've got 41 points in the fourth quarter. They're starting to get it going late. We want to see them get it going early, but it was the opposite at the beginning of the season. They were letting down in the fourth quarter. They have taken off in the fourth quarter. Like I said, 10 and then 21 against the Falcons and another 10 last week. So they're finishing games the way they're supposed to finish them. Not only do I like the Minnesota Vikings, 59% TD percentage in the red zone, which is pretty damn good. The fact that they have 15 more offensive red zone appearances than the Seattle Seahawks, and they still have a better percentage. Seattle's been in there 15 less times, and they only have 52%. The Vikings have been in there, 51 trips to the red zone, 30 touchdowns. That's pretty good. Yeah. 51 trips, and they have 36 trips with only 19 touchdowns. Vikings are a better red zone offense and a better red zone defense. Seattle's got problems there, too, with their red zone. I don't know what they're going to do this week. We're just getting stronger as the games go on, but this is another one. I can't seem to give Seattle a helmet on this board yet. Vikings, checkmark, red zone.
Chris.
Like Drew mentioned earlier with the offensive line, this is a finesse offensive line for Seattle, and that generally doesn't work terribly well once you get in the red zone. You have to have the ability to kind of power it in every once in a while. And the Seahawks really can't do that. Their running backs really aren't power backs. Their offensive line really isn't a strong run-blocking offensive line. Whereas the Vikings, we keep talking about TJ Hawkinson. He's back. He doesn't have a touchdown yet. I think this is the week he finally gets on the board as far as that goes. He's got to get himself a touchdown here eventually. And I think this is the week for him to do it. So, yeah, the Vikings have more options in the red zone. They have better blocking in the red zone. And they have the better defense in the red zone, so we'll give them another check mark.
One thing that has really impressed me the last 2 weeks for the Vikings, both offensively and defensively, they had, I think in the last 2 games, they've had 3 rushing touchdowns inside the 5. I know they had 2 last week, one from Aaron Jones, one from Cam Akers. And defensively against the Bears and the previous week's opponent was Falcons, they just shut down those 2 teams. And the Cardinals the week before that.
Yeah, Arizona was 1 for 6 in the red zone.
A tired cliche. I hate using it, but it was very much a bend but don't break, at least in the Cardinals and the Falcons game. But in the Bears game, it was more kind of a more dominating defense. But when the Bears did get into the red zone, they didn't let them score. Vikings at one point defensively were in the 20s in the red zone. They have bumped up to 13th defensively in red zone, and the Vikings are 9th. And now the thing that was frustrating me was they would have 1st and goal on the 1, and they would not run the ball. Last week, they ran the ball, and Cam Akers punched it in from the 1. Aaron Jones punched it in from the 2 or the 3. The hole open up by the offensive line was like parting of the Red Sea. It was wonderful to see. And if that can keep up, the Vikings are in business come playoff time. They just are. Seattle, they're terrible running the ball. They've got a lot of turnovers. I like the Vikings in the red zone. I'm going to go with the Vikings here. Special teams. Will Reichard's back. Will Reichard was cash money when he first started the season. He's down 17 for 20 on field goals. He's missed 1 each from 30 to 39, 40 to 49, and 50 plus. 2 of those misses were when he was hurt right before he went on IR, that last game before he went on IR. One was when his first game off of IR. Last week, he settled down. I think he made all his kicks. I don't think he missed a kick last week.
Nope.
He actually got a game ball. So he seems to be back on track. Josh Myers is 22 of 25. He's missed 1 from 40 to 49, 2 kicks from 50 plus. Weather's going to be a factor. Drew, I know you want to do the weather report here in a little bit, so I won't steal your thunder. It's going to be interesting to see how Will Reichard does in kind of a sloppy weather conditions. I think Reichard's back. I think Will the Thrill is back. I'm going to lean Vikings here. Chris.
I think the weather conditions are going to play a little bit of a factor. Reichard played a lot of his games at Alabama. They didn't have to deal with a lot of that sort of thing. The Seahawks special teamers have to deal with that more frequently than the Vikings special teamers do. And as far as the punting side of things goes, Michael Dixon has been one of the best punters in the league for a long time now. And Ryan Wright has been kind of up and down, had his struggles, not consistent, not like he was his rookie year. He's had a couple of rough seasons since then. Just because of the familiarity with the conditions and whatnot, I am going to take a slight lean towards Seattle on this one.
That's fair. Okay. Drew?
I am too, for those exact same reasons. When it comes to special teams and it's raining, you get those, which punt returner is going to drop it because of the wind and the rain. The return game comes into a factor if you're going to give somebody a short field because they botched some play. Myers is used to kicking in Seattle with those conditions, so he's more used to it than Will Reichert is. The wind and the rain, he's only missed one under 50. And to be honest, I'm not happy with the Viking special teams for like the last 5 weeks. They're dwindling. I don't know what's going on. That Bears game with the kickoff and all that, and then we had the block punt last week. And without that block in the back, the Bears would have had another 40-yard punt return without the block in the back. I am not happy with what Daniels. He needs to turn it around or he's going to get fired because he was doing really well the first 8 games of the season. Viking special team has dropped off, guys. It's dropped off, and it needs to get back to where it needs to be. But until they earn my respect back, everything I just said, and especially everything Chris just said, I'm in agreement with. I am going to give the Seahawks the check mark for the special team.
Okay. Chris, talk to us about coaching.
First, I want to kick this off by saying this as someone who listens to the Yacht Rock channel way more than he probably should. I am thrilled that the Seahawks have a head coach named Michael McDonald. That's I really don't know. It's like that Rick Moranis skit from SCTV where he did the Michael McDonald impression. If you've never seen that, you gotta look that up. That's absolutely just killer. But we talked a lot about coaching early on in the show in the preview section and whatnot. And if you're gonna say a guy's coach of the year, he kind of gets the check mark here. This is Mike McDonald's first year as the head coach, but Kevin O'Connell is one of the top coaches in the National Football League. And he should be the coach of the year this year. And, the rest of the coaching staff has an advantage as well, I think. So, yeah, easy check mark for Minnesota here.
Drew?
I'm going to go with Minnesota with the check mark, but I feel kind of along the lines with McDonald's as I do how Jonathan Gannon is in Arizona. Eventually, he's going to figure it. He's the right guy for the job, but it's just new. The offensive coordinator, Ryan Grubb, he's new. It's his first year. But McDonald, when he was coaching over at Baltimore for John Harbaugh, he coached like 3 or 4 different positions. And then one day he's talking to Jim Harbaugh, and Jim Harbaugh's going, dude, I got to get rid of Don Brown. He's going to get me fired. Don Brown is killing my Wolverines. He goes, oh, yeah, how about Mike McDonald? And I think Jim Harbaugh said, the singer from the Doobie Brothers. And he says, no. He's long story short, came over to Michigan, had the best college football defense in the country when he became the coordinator for Michigan for 1 season in 2021. John Harbaugh calls Jim back and says, I need that guy back here. And Harbaugh's going, what? He's defensive coordinator. Well, I need him to be my defensive coordinator. He goes back to Baltimore, kicks ass for them. It's just a matter of time before this guy got a head coaching job. He's a fantastic defensive-minded coach, and he's a fantastic players coach. McDonald is going to survive there, and he's going to do well. He's doing well this year for his first season. But what I'm saying is he just doesn't have the experience yet, like Gannon has in Arizona. It's the right guy, but he needs to get worked into what he's doing. So I am going to give the Vikings a check mark, but I think Mike McDonald is the right guy to be running that. He's a great head coach, very smart guy. He's the right guy for the job.
Well, ballsy move leaving the Doobie Brothers and a lucrative solo career to take a head coaching job in the NFL. And if you think I'm going to pick him over Kevin O'Connell, Brian Flores, well, what a fool would believe that. But that's all I'm going to say. Oh.
We might believe you if we had a minute by minute to think about it.
Yeah, but we keep forgetting. That's the biggest part of the problem.
People who watch the show, if I did take Mike McDonald, they'd be taking it to the streets. Is what? Oh, hey. But no, seriously, Drew, I do agree with you. McDonald is a good coach. He really is. All kidding aside, the way the Vikings are playing right now, I can't pick against him. And look, the Seahawks, I was just looking at their record. They have been a very streaky team. They started off 3-0, and then they lost, 6 of 7, and then they won 4 in a row.
Right.
And then they got beat pretty bad by the Packers. And when they've lost, I mean, they've lost a couple close games, but some of their losses were pretty brutal. They lost 42-29 to Detroit. They lost 31-10 to Buffalo. They lost 30-13 to the Packers. Like, when they've lost to good teams, they've lost pretty bad. And look, the Vikings are a good team. I think they just might be in for a rough afternoon. And it's nothing against McDonald. They're dealing with some significant injuries. I'm going with the Vikings coaching staff.